Hey guys, tonight we drift back into a world where marble glows under torchlight, and every alley seems alive with laughter, secrets, and just a little danger. You're stepping into ancient Rome, a place that, believe it or not, had party highs that would make your favorite nightclub feel like a sleepy library. The air smells of smoke and roasted meat, and somewhere behind you, a lyre plucks out a lazy tune. You can almost taste the spiced wine hanging heavy in the night air. And yes, you probably won't survive this, but don't worry. It's just a story, and you're safe here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead and drop your location and local time down in the comments too, so we can see where in the world everyone is drifting off together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander down a stone-paved street that glimmers faintly with spilled oil lamps. The laughter of a group of revelers spills from an open doorway, one of Rome's countless taverns. The crowd inside sways, their voices rising and falling, cups clinking like a chorus of restless bells. This isn't some dry historical reenactment. You're there, shoulder brushing against tunics, smelling the rough leather of sandals, hearing the faint notes of flute and drum drifting out into the night. Now Rome wasn't just a city of laws and legions, it was also a city that loved to celebrate. And when Romans celebrated, they didn't with wine, theater, music, and more substances than you'd ever expect. It wasn't just about sipping a glass of Merlot by candlelight. No, they stretched the boundaries of intoxication like a cat stretching its claws. Mainstream historians remind us that wine wasn't merely a drink in Rome. It was practically a second bloodstream. The poet Horace even joked that no serious conversation should ever start without at least a little wine involved. But here's the quirky twist. Romans thought drinking wine straight, undiluted, was barbaric. Yes, you heard that right. If you were at a party and decided to drink wine without cutting it with water, people would look at you like you'd just eaten soup with your bare hands. They mixed it down not because they were lightweight, but because Roman wine was insanely strong, often closer to syrup than the bottles you pick up at a supermarket today. As you watch the scene unfold, someone ladles a dark, almost inky red wine into a wide bronze cup. A few sprigs of herbs are floating on top. You notice the sharp scent, definitely not your average Pinot. This was where the fun began. Romans loved tossing in all sorts of things, from honey to pepper, from resin to flowers, to change the flavor or, let's just say, the effect. And here's where scholars still argue whether some of these additions were purely for taste, or whether they were chasing something a little trippier. Mandrake root, for example, could slip into a concoction. Used in medicine, sure, but in wine? It could knock you sideways, leave you giggling, or dreaming strange dreams. A sip too many, and you might start believing Bacchus himself was dancing in the courtyard. The night grows thicker, warmer. You drift further into the tavern, and notice a man leaning against a column, muttering verses of Ovid between gulps. His eyes are glassy, but his grin is sharp. Across the room, two women sprinkle spices into their cups, laughing at the faces of men, daring each other to taste the brew. These aren't refined rituals of aristocrats. This is life, loud, messy, intoxicating. But don't think it was all wild chaos. Even in these dim-lit corners, Rome carried rules. Drinking together was a performance, a way of showing status. If you sipped too slowly, people mocked you for being uptight. If you gulped too fast, you risked being called a barbarian. The right pace was part of the art of being Roman, and you're just trying to keep your balance in the swaying crowd, hoping no one notices your cup is still half full. And then someone passes you a slice of bread soaked in wine, laughing, urging you to eat. The taste is sharp, bittersweet, with a hint of something earthy beneath it. You can't tell if it's just old wine or if there's some exotic root blended in. Maybe it's nothing, or maybe it's one of those odd additives that Roman apothecaries knew could stir the mind. Outside, the moon dips low, silver brushing across rooftops. You step back into the street, heart beating just a little faster, breath carrying the warmth of Roman drink. You realize tonight is only just beginning, and you're already caught in the velvet hum of a city that lived for excess. The truth is, the Romans didn't just invent aqueducts, roads, and gladiator games. They also perfected the art of turning an ordinary evening into a marathon of intoxication, where flavors, herbs, and wine blurred the line between sober reality and hazy, shimmering dream. And here you are, in the middle of it, half drifting, half floating, wondering just how much higher this night can carry you. The street glows faintly as you move further into Rome's nocturnal heart. Torches flicker, shadows leap across walls, and every doorway hums with life. You feel it now, the pulse of wine running through the city. It isn't just a drink here, it's practically liquid culture. Every sip tells you something about class, tradition, and appetite. You wander closer to a courtyard where amphorae, those tall clay jars, stand lined up like silent sentinels, each stuffed with the city's true lifeblood. Romans lived and breathed wine, not in the casual way we pop open a bottle on weekends, but in a deep, woven into daily life kind of way. In fact, there's a mainstream historical fact that surprises most people. Children sometimes drank diluted wine too, treated almost like a safer option than contaminated water. Imagine being 8 years old and casually sipping your watered-down vino at dinner. It was normal here, but don't be fooled by that harmless-sounding detail. Roman wine was a beast of its own. Unlike today's polished Cabernet or Chardonnay, this stuff was thick, often cloudy, and wildly potent. That's why they always mixed it with water, sometimes hot, sometimes cold, depending on the season and mood. To drink it straight, that was the mark of outsiders, people Romans sneered at. They even used the word marum for pure wine, the way we might say straight shots, the kind of thing that earned side eyes and whispers. As you linger near the amphorae, you catch sight of a servant plunging a ladle into one jar and pouring it into a crater, a wide mixing bowl. Water is added, then honey, maybe a dash of herbs. Suddenly, the ordinary transforms into something else. Sweet, spiced, endlessly drinkable. Cups are dipped in, passed around, and laughter bursts into the air as voices grow louder, looser, brighter. And here's the quirky detail. Romans sometimes flavored wine with seawater. Yes, seawater. They believed it made the wine last longer, gave it a bracing quality. You can almost feel the salt sting your tongue as you imagine the taste. Not exactly what you'd order at a nightclub bar, unless you enjoy a chaser of ocean waves with your buzz. You weave into the crowd and notice how central wine is to the performance of Roman society. Senators sip slowly, measured, like every drop carries political weight. Poets gush dramatically, using their cups as props for their verses. Gladiators lean against pillars, gulping down their portions, eyes burning with the wildness of men who face death in the arena by day and chase pleasure by night. But here's where things start to get tricky. Romans didn't just stop at flavoring wine with honey or pepper. They sometimes infused it with herbs that blurred the line between beverage and drug. One such addition was opium poppy, known to ancient Medici. Scholars still argue whether it was commonly used in social settings or restricted to certain rituals. But the possibility lingers in the smoky air that some cups carried not just relaxation, but a haze of dreamlike visions. Your cup is refilled without asking, the liquid shimmering under torchlight. The taste is sweeter this time, almost dangerously so. Easy to forget you're drinking alcohol at all. Around you, laughter sharpens, gestures grow bigger, conversations drift into confessions. Wine for Romans wasn't just a way to get drunk. It was a tool to unlock the soul, to loosen tongues, to reveal what lay hidden beneath marble facades. Somewhere nearby, a musician plucks a soft melody. You sway with the rhythm, the weight of the day melting. The tavern, the courtyard, the whole city feels wrapped in a velvety fog of drink. It's easy to see why Romans didn't just consume wine. They celebrated it, worshipped it, almost deified it. And yet, even as you let yourself slip into the warmth, you can't help but notice the fine line. Too little, and you're uptight, rigid, a bore. Too much, and you cross into the territory of fools, mocked for losing control. The art was in balance, in pacing yourself through a night that could stretch until dawn. A senator at the far table raises his cup, his voice booming about the greatness of Rome, his words slurring into nonsense by the end. Everyone laughs, not cruelly, but knowingly. You get the sense that here, in this city, wine is the equalizer. No matter how rich, how powerful, how educated, everyone bends to its sway. As you slip back toward the street, the scent of spiced wine clings to you. The night feels softer now, your steps slower, your breath warmer. You realize you've only just touched the surface of Rome's intoxicating secrets. Beyond these taverns lie stranger brews, more daring concoctions, and rituals that push the boundary between revelry and revelation. And as the moon climbs higher, so too does your curiosity. What else are the Romans pouring into their cups tonight? The moonlight follows you as you wander deeper into Rome's underbelly, your sandals brushing against uneven cobblestones. You've had your fill of diluted wine for now, but the night has other flavors waiting. Not everything is poured from amphorae or mixed in bronze bowls. Some of Rome's real secrets lie tucked away in powders, roots, and seeds. Little fragments of the natural world that could twist your senses into entirely new shapes. You slip into a narrow side street where an apothecary keeps his shop. The shelves are lined with jars, bundles of herbs, dried roots dangling from the rafters like sleeping bats. The air is sharp with the sense of earth, resin, and something almost metallic. Here is where the line between medicine and mischief begins to blur. One of the most notorious ingredients, the opium poppy. Ancient medical texts confirm its use. Romans knew well that a pinch could soothe pain, calm nerves, or, when taken more liberally, plunge a person into heavy, dream-filled sleep. That's your mainstream historical fact for this stretch. Opium wasn't some far-off discovery centuries later. No, it was already making its rounds in ancient Rome. But the quirky detail is this. They didn't just swallow it in neat doses. Sometimes poppy juice found its way into wine. Imagine sipping your evening cup and feeling not just a buzz, but a slow, floating sensation tugging you away from reality. Scholars still argue whether this was common practice or reserved for daring revelers and fringe circles, but the possibility alone is enough to make you wonder what's really swirling in those cups back at the tavern. Next, your gaze lands on mandrake root, twisted and gnarled like a miniature human body. People whispered that it screamed when pulled from the earth, a myth carried on through the ages. Romans prized it for its soporific qualities, slipping it into concoctions as a sleeping aid or a way to ease pain. But in stronger doses, mandrake could send you spinning, visions flashing behind your eyelids. A Roman banquet guest who sipped too eagerly might wake up hours later, unsure whether they had seen the god Bacchus in a vision or simply passed out on a tiled floor. And then there's henbane, another plant lurking in the apothecary's jars. A little might relax your body. A little more, and hallucinations creep in. shapes, colors, whispers from shadows. Its effects were so notorious that even in later centuries, it found itself tangled up with tales of witches and flying ointments. You run your fingers along the clay container, the word hyoscyamus scratched into its side. You step back and notice that not all these substances came from Roman soil. Trade routes reached across the known world, pulling in herbs and spices from Egypt, the Near East, and beyond. Frankincense and myrrh, usually burned in temples, were sometimes crumbled into drinks for a heady, dizzying effect. Rumors even swirled of hashish, carried along caravan routes, though whether it truly reached Rome is a matter scholars still debate heatedly. The whispers of smoke laughter. And visions suggest that maybe, just maybe, it did. The apothecary hums to himself as he grinds herbs into a fine powder. You watch the mortar rise and fall, the pestle crunching like distant footsteps. He mixes, pours, and sets small packets onto the counter, each wrapped in cloth. Buyers slip in, exchange coins, and hurry out, tucking their treasures into tunics. You're tempted to reach for one yourself, but instead, you simply breathe in the mingling scents. The night feels thicker here, almost sticky with the weight of possibility. A pinch of this, a root of that, and your world could tilt, sway, dissolve into visions of gods and monsters. Or maybe just leave you snoring in a back alley. When you finally step back into the open street, the noise of Rome's nightlife hits you again. Cups clink, music drifts, laughter rises. But now you know there's more in those drinks than just fermented grapes. Hidden in every sip might be poppy, mandrake, or something stranger still, quietly carrying revelers away on private journeys. The air feels warmer as you move on, the apothecary's jars still lingering in your mind. And you wonder, if wine is Rome's blood, then perhaps these herbs are its dreams, dark, strange, and intoxicating. And tonight, those dreams are spilling everywhere. You drift further into the city and suddenly hear the faint echoes of laughter spilling out of a villa courtyard. The sound is richer here, smoother, not the rough shouts of taverns, but the polished tones of Rome's elite. Curiosity pulls you in, and you slip past the marble archway into a banquet unlike anything you've seen before. Torches flicker against painted walls, casting shadows that dance across mosaics of gods and battles. Reclining couches line the space, each occupied by men and women draped in fine silks, their sandals jeweled, their hair oiled to perfection. Slaves move like shadows, carrying silver trays, refilling cups, dropping slices of roasted meats onto plates, and more intriguingly, pouring strange mixtures into bowls. This isn't simple drinking. This is performance. Banquets in Rome were places where excess wasn't just expected, it was the rule. To host poorly, to serve dull flavors or weak wine was social suicide. So every host went further, pushing boundaries with taste, spectacle, and sometimes substances that carried their guests into stranger territory. Here's your mainstream historical fact for the night. Roman banquets could last for hours, even days, stretching across multiple meals, musical performances, and discussions. They weren't just dinners, they were cultural marathons. And with that much time to fill, people found creative ways to keep the energy flowing. A servant sets a cup in your hand. The wine glistens darker than usual, and you catch a whiff of something sharper beneath the sweetness. You take a sip. It's honeyed, smooth, but then there's a bitterness clinging at the edges of your tongue. You realize it's been mixed with spices and herbs far more potent than anything you've tasted in the street taverns. A guest nearby waves their hand, telling a story about the god Bacchus descending into mortal feasts, blessing drinkers with wild visions. Everyone laughs, not entirely because it's funny, but because they know the feeling. Wine infused with mandrake or opium wasn't just drink. It was an invitation to dream with your eyes open. Scholars still argue whether these stories are exaggerations, but the glint in the eyes around you suggests some people weren't just imagining. You notice another oddity: bowls of food that seem less about flavor and more about effect. Mushrooms, some harmless, others less so, sliced thin and baked into pastries. Fish sauces spiced so heavily you can barely taste the fish at all. Exotic fruits stuffed with nuts and drizzled in sticky fermented syrups. Each dish feels like another layer of indulgence, one more step down a staircase that leads away from ordinary life. And then there's the ritual. A group at the far end reclines around a crater as a servant ladles out a special batch. They murmur, chant lightly, toast together, then drink in unison. Their laughter rises, eyes glaze, bodies relax. You realize you're witnessing something between religion and recreation, a blur of indulgence wrapped in ceremony. The quirky detail? Vomiting was considered perfectly acceptable, sometimes even strategic. Wealthy guests would slip away between courses to make room for more, then return smiling, ready for the next round of wine and delicacies. To the Romans, it wasn't disgusting, it was dedication. After all, why stop the party when you can just reset? You recline a little, feeling the cushions soften beneath you. Around you, conversations spiral into philosophy, gossip, poetry, and politics. One man insists the emperor himself secretly favors a certain blend of poppy wine. Another counters with a story of a senator collapsing mid-speech after a banquet. Truth or fiction hardly matters. The point is the thrill of telling it, the edge of scandal and indulgence. And all the while, music hums in the background. A flute, a drum, voices weaving in song. You close your eyes for a moment and let the sound carry you. The night feels endless, as though the torches will never burn out, as though the flow of wine and herbs will never cease. When you finally stand, your legs feel lighter, your head softer, the world tilting just slightly. This wasn't just food and drink. It was a performance of power, wealth, and pleasure. To be at such a banquet meant you belonged to a world where limits didn't exist. As you step back into the cool Roman night, the villa's laughter echoing behind you, you realize that the streets may have their taverns and apothecaries, but it's here, in these marble halls, where indulgence became art. And tonight, that art has only begun to show its strangest colors. The night carries you onward, your steps echoing against marble columns as the city hums like a living creature. You've seen the taverns, tasted the banquets, felt the sway of herbs and spices, but now you stumble into something far older, stranger, and more dangerous. Behind a set of bronze doors, half hidden in ivy and shadow, a gathering pulses with the rhythm of drums. The scent of incense curls out, sweet and dizzying, tugging you closer. You push inside and find yourself surrounded by dancers moving in a frenzy, their hair wild, their tunics loose, their eyes wide with a mix of devotion and intoxication. This is no ordinary party. This is a ritual to Dionysus, whom the Romans called Bacchus. And here, wine doesn't just flow, it transforms into ecstasy. The mainstream historical fact here is undeniable. Rome absorbed the cult of Bacchus from the Greeks, and for a time, these rituals spread wildly across the city. They were gatherings of music, wine, and ecstatic movement. The authorities even tried to ban them at one point, fearing the chaos they unleashed. You watch as cups pass hand to hand, liquid splashing onto the marble floor. But these aren't casual sips. Each gulp is part of the rite, a way to blur the line between mortal and divine. The participants believe Bacchus himself descends among them, his spirit bubbling through their veins. Some fall to the ground laughing, others cry out in joy, and still others sway as though possessed. And here's your quirky detail. Goats sometimes played a role in these rites, symbolizing fertility, wildness, and chaos. Imagine the scene. Torches flaring, bodies writhing, wine staining lips red, and somewhere in the corner, an actual goat bleeding as if it too were caught up in the frenzy. Not quite your modern nightclub, but close enough that you feel the same raw pulse of abandon. You notice herbs being tossed into the wine, powders sprinkled across bowls of fruit, mandrake, henbane, maybe even opium, all wrapped into the ritual. Scholars still argue whether these were symbolic offerings to the god or deliberate enhancements for the worshippers. Either way, the result is the same, a swirl of vision, sound, and surrender. The music grows louder, the rhythm relentless. Drums pound like a second heartbeat, flutes shriek high notes, voices chant in unison. You can feel your own chest thumping in time, your body wanting to sway with the crowd. Someone grabs your hand, pulling you into the circle. You're swept into a whirl of movement, your feet stumbling, your head light, your vision catching flashes of torchlight and painted faces. And then something strange happens. The boundary between reality and dream softens. The torches seem to ripple, their flames bending in impossible patterns. The chant deepens, and for a moment you swear you see Bacchus himself, ivy crown on his head, wine cup in hand, his eyes both joyful and terrifying. Is it real? Or just the mix of wine, herbs, and rhythm? You'll never know. The night stretches. Hours pass, though you can't tell how many. Some dancers collapse, exhausted, their chests rising and falling like waves. Others whisper prayers, their voices cracked from shouting. And you, still swaying, feel both drained and strangely alive. As though you've touched something beyond the ordinary. Finally, the ritual slows. The drums fade, the torches gutter, the laughter softens into murmurs. People rest against columns, faces shining with sweat and wine, their eyes heavy but satisfied. The air is thick, humid with incense and breath, and you know this was no simple party. This was a gateway, a step outside the rigid order of Roman life, into a world where ecstasy, madness, and divinity blended into one. As you step back into the cool night air, your ears ringing with phantom drums, you realize Rome wasn't just a city of law and order. It was also a city that flirted constantly with chaos. And in the cult of Bacchus, chaos wore a crown of ivy and demanded another round of wine. The cool air outside feels almost shocking after the fever of the Bacchic ritual. The torches flicker behind you, their light shrinking as the doors close. You take a deep breath of the night, fresh, almost cold, with just a trace of the Tiber's damp scent. For a moment, your head clears, but the city never sleeps, and neither do its temptations. You wander through the winding alleys, the moon casting shadows that stretch like skeletal fingers across the stones. Somewhere ahead, you hear the low hum of chanting. Not joyous this time, something heavier, more secretive. Intrigued, you follow the sound, weaving through narrow passageways until you find a small gathering near the ruins of an old shrine. These aren't worshippers of Bacchus. Their ritual is quieter, more deliberate, almost whispered. At the center sits a bowl of smoldering herbs, strong, acrid, and strangely sweet. The smoke coils upward, gray against the moonlight, and those gathered lean into it, inhaling deeply. Their eyes glaze, their bodies rock in slow rhythm. Here, history gets both factual and speculative. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence that Romans experimented with a range of psychoactive herbs. Opium imported from the East, henbane used in medicine, and mandrake, long associated with love potions and visions. While official records often painted such practices as dangerous superstition, the persistence of these rituals suggests they were common among those who craved something beyond wine. A man in the circle, begins to mutter words in a language you don't recognize, perhaps a prayer, perhaps nonsense shaped by the smoke. His voice deepens, trembles, then breaks into laughter. A woman beside him hums a tune, soft at first, then louder, until her hum becomes a wail, eerie and beautiful at once. You watch as the group passes a cup around, filled with some mixture darker than wine. It smells bitter, earthy, with a faint metallic tang. One sip, and the drinker's eyes roll back slightly before they sigh, shoulders slumping as though they've set down a heavy burden. A curious thought enters your mind. Were these people escaping or connecting? To a Roman, the line was thin. Wine, herbs, smoke, they could all be medicine, poison, or pathway, depending on the dose. To sit in this circle was to gamble with the balance, to risk the edge of madness for a glimpse of the divine. Someone gestures to you, offering the cup. The smoke curls toward your face, warm and insistent. Your fingers twitch with temptation, but you hesitate. Do you join them, letting the herbs sink into your lungs and the potion into your blood? Or do you watch from the edge, an outsider to their mystery? Before you can decide, the group rises as one, moving in a slow, spiraling dance around the smoldering bowl. Their shadows twist across the walls, long and liquid. The chant grows louder, the rhythm steady, hypnotic. The smoke thickens until your vision blurs, and the moon itself seems to shiver. For a heartbeat, or maybe an eternity, you glimpse something impossible. The smoke takes form, a face, vast and ancient, carved in air, eyes glowing like embers. It leans close, lips parting as if to speak. But then the bowl sputters, the fire dies, and the vision collapses into nothing. The ritual ends as quietly as it began. The group disperses, slipping into the shadows without a word, as if they were never there. You're left alone in the ruins, your skin prickling, your heartbeat uneven. Did you really see it? Or was it simply the smoke, the suggestion, the power of expectation? In Rome, truth and illusion walk hand in hand. And as you continue your journey, you realize the city isn't just built on stone. It's built on dreams, visions, and the strange ways humans chase what lies beyond the ordinary. The streets grow quieter now, as though the city itself has finally decided to rest. You drift toward a narrow lane where lanterns still glow faintly in upper windows. From one of the doorways spills a faint, bitter scent, something halfway between a pharmacy and a tavern. You step inside. The room is lined with shelves, each crammed with jars, bundles of herbs, and little clay vials sealed with wax. A man in a white tunic sits at a desk, grinding something in a mortar with a rhythm that feels almost ritualistic. He looks up, eyes sharp yet weary, and nods at you as though you're just another patient in the endless stream of Romans who walk through his door. This isn't a tavern. It's an officina medici, a physician's workshop, and in Rome, medicine and mischief are often the same thing. He gestures for you to sit while he fusses with a mixture of powders. He mutters about papaver somniferum, the opium poppy brought from faraway fields. He speaks of mandrake root, carved carefully into small doses to induce sleep, and henbane, whose seeds can dull pain but twist the mind if taken too freely. He mixes them not with water, but with wine, because in Rome, wine is the universal solvent. He places the cup in your hands, steady and cool. For sleep, he says, though you're not entirely sure if that's a promise or a warning. You sip, and the taste is earthy, bitter, laced with something metallic. Your tongue tingles, your throat warms, and your eyelids feel suddenly heavier. Roman doctors were respected, but they were also feared. One fact often overlooked: the line between cure and poison was thin. Galen, one of Rome's most famous physicians, wrote entire treatises about balancing humors with concoctions that could just as easily intoxicate as heal. Scholars still argue whether doctors knowingly encouraged mild euphoria in their patients, or if the bliss was simply a side effect everyone quietly enjoyed. As you linger in the dimly lit workshop, the physician brings out a jar of dried leaves imported from lands far east. He speaks in low tones about how traders claim it calms the nerves, though some whisper it excites the mind instead. He grinds them into a powder and mixes it with honey, pressing it into little lozenges. For the wealthy, he smirks, sliding them into a pouch. You notice how easily the practice of healing blurs into indulgence. A soldier might come for relief from wounds, but leave with a taste for the dreamy haze of opium. A wealthy matron might request a sedative for sleeplessness, but savor the strange visions it brings. Even the physician himself, eyes ringed with exhaustion, occasionally takes a sip of his own medicine. Behind you, two men enter, whispering urgently. One clutches his stomach, groaning, while the other urges the physician to act quickly. The doctor frowns, digs through his jars, and produces a syrup. You watch as he hesitates before handing it over, muttering that too much will open the gates too wide. You realize what he means. The dose between healing and harming is a knife edge. You slip back into the street, the taste of herbs still lingering on your tongue. The night air cools your face, but your body feels light, almost untethered, as if the medicine has seeped into your very bones. You realize that in Rome, medicine wasn't just about survival. It was part of the same restless search for altered states that filled the taverns, the shrines, and the banquets. Perhaps the Romans weren't so different from you, after all. They wanted to quiet the noise in their minds, to dull the ache in their bodies, to drift into sleep or maybe into visions. They trusted their physicians, but they also knew, deep down, that every remedy carried a taste of temptation. And as you walk further into the Roman night, you wonder if the city itself is the doctor, handing out both cures and poisons with every cup it offers. You pass beneath an archway carved with faded Latin letters, the stone cold and damp beneath your fingertips. Beyond it, the city opens into a small square where merchants are packing up their stalls. Yet even this late, a few linger, hawking not bread or oil, but curiosities from faraway lands. Their tables glimmer with strange powders, incense, and bundles of herbs wrapped in twine. The smoke of something exotic lingers, curling into the night like a secret. Rome thrived on trade. Ships docked from Egypt, caravans rolled in from Persia, and goods passed through bustling markets that felt like the beating heart of the empire. Alongside spices, silks, and perfumes came stranger cargo, fragments of plants, crystals, resins, all carrying rumors of mystical effects. The Romans, curious and bold, welcomed them eagerly. You approach one merchant draped in brightly colored cloth. His voice is smooth, accented, each word dripping with promise. He gestures to a lump of golden resin. Frankincense, he says, from Arabia. Officially, it's burned in temples, its smoke rising as an offering to the gods. But privately, some Romans burned it in their homes, breathing deeply as though its sweetness could cleanse not only air, but mind. Was it divine or just intoxicating? Scholars still argue whether the Romans considered frankincense a mild drug or simply a holy perfume. Another merchant shows you darker resin, myrrh, bitter and rich. Mixed into wine, he claims, it soothes pain and sharpens dreams. You remember stories of Roman matrons sipping such mixtures at feasts, half medicine, half luxury, blurring the line between healing and indulgence. But the strangest comes from a quiet man with sun-scorched skin who lays out a small pouch of green-brown flakes. He speaks little Latin, but through gestures and broken words, you gather whispers of a plant smoked in the east, something that brings laughter, hunger, and drifting visions. Some say it's hemp, carried through the trade routes like a stowaway secret. Others insist Rome never truly embraced it, that the rumors are more modern imagination than fact. The debate lingers, as debates always do, somewhere between smoke and silence. You pick up the pouch, inhaling its earthy, spicy scent. It stings your nose, yet leaves a sweetness behind. The merchant watches you closely, eyes glinting as though he knows exactly what you're imagining. A party, perhaps, where nobles pass such a pouch in a gilded chamber, their laughter echoing long into the night. You buy nothing, at least not tonight, but the idea stays with you. Rome wasn't just intoxicated by what it brewed itself, but by the treasures it stole, traded, or borrowed from the edges of the known world. In every puff of incense, every drop of spiced resin, was the thrill of contact with something foreign, mysterious, and dangerous. As you leave the square, the merchants' voices fade, swallowed by the city's hush. Yet the scents cling to your clothes, sweet, bitter, smoky. A reminder that Rome's nightlife wasn't confined within its own walls. It reached across deserts and seas, pulling in secrets from distant lands, weaving them into its restless rhythm. The stars above glimmer faintly, and for a moment, you imagine them as lanterns on a caravan, guiding traders through endless dunes, carrying bundles of herbs that will one day end up in a Roman's cup. And you, wandering here centuries later, feel the echo of those journeys on your tongue and in your lungs. The streets widen as you wander closer to the Forum. But tonight, it's no place of speeches or senatorial debates. The marble columns stand silent, moonlight painting them silver. Yet just beyond, in an open courtyard, you hear the unmistakable roar of a crowd. You follow the sound, drawn like a moth, until you step into chaos that makes every tavern and shrine look tame. It's Saturnalia, the festival where the world flips upside down, and Rome sheds every ounce of restraint. Servants dine like masters, masters play the fool, and the city transforms into one giant carnival. You can almost feel the air pulsing, wine pouring endlessly, dice clattering on tables, music hammering from pipes and drums. Everywhere, garlands hang, candles glow, and laughter bursts like fireworks. A man in rags stumbles past you, but his gold ring gives him away. He's no beggar, just a noble playing the role for the night. He presses a cup into your hand, red wine spilling over the rim. "Drink," he shouts, grinning wildly. You do, and the wine is rich, spiced with honey and pepper, already headier than anything you've tasted. Nearby, a woman dances barefoot on a table, her tunic slipping from her shoulder as she throws her head back and howls at the moon. The crowd cheers, and someone tosses more garlands around her neck. Behind her, a group huddles with cups of something darker than wine, their whispers drowned by the music. You catch a glimpse, herbs floating on the surface, little chunks of resin melting into the liquid, stronger stuff. This is no ordinary feast. It's excess on a scale the city only allows a few times a year. And it's not just Saturnalia. You've heard of Bacchanalia too, once wild and secret rites to Bacchus, where worship turned into debauchery, so intense the Senate tried to ban them. But prohibition only made the rumors spread. Visions, frenzied dances, lovers tangled in shadows, and cups that never seemed to empty. You weave through the chaos, and every corner reveals something stranger. A group of men dressed as women, laughing at their own falsetto voices, children pelting their elders with nuts, while the elders only laugh harder. Even the stern marble statues seem to grin in the candlelight, as if the gods themselves have joined in. Somewhere in the crowd, a man begins to tell a story about Saturn himself, the god who devoured his children until Jupiter overthrew him. Yet in this moment, no one fears Saturn. They celebrate him, They drink and revel as though swallowing joy itself, knowing tomorrow they'll return to order, but tonight they belong to chaos. One fact historians often note: festivals like Saturnalia blurred the line between religion and riot, between sacred ritual and outright intoxication. Scholars still argue whether the drug-laced drinks and incense were intentional tools to reach ecstasy, or if they were simply excesses people excused as divine. A cup is offered again, this time sweeter, thicker, with a tang of herbs. You take a sip, and the taste blossoms across your tongue. First honey, then smoke, then something sharp that makes your vision sparkle. The world tilts, colors deepen, and the music swells until it feels like it's coming from inside your chest. You laugh, loud and sudden, and no one notices because everyone is laughing too. Or hours, maybe minutes, you're swept into the current of Saturnalia, spinning with strangers, drinking from endless cups, tasting food so rich they almost sting. And though your body tires, the festival refuses to fade. Rome, in its most unbuttoned form, will not let you rest until dawn. When at last you stagger out into the chill night air, the city still hums behind you, alive and glowing. Your head spins, your body aches, but your heart is strangely light. You've seen the Romans not as conquerors or senators, but as revelers, seekers of joy, chasers of highs as wild as anything you'd find in a modern nightclub. And you know this. Tomorrow, they'll wear their togas and march with solemn dignity again. But tonight, the city belonged to Saturn, and to every intoxicant that made Rome forget its own rules. The echoes of Saturnalia still ring in your ears as you drift into a quieter quarter of the city. The laughter fades, replaced by the low murmur of whispers and the soft plucking of a lute behind closed doors. You notice a small gathering in the courtyard of a villa. Candles flicker, shadows stretch, and the scent of spiced wine floats toward you. You slip inside, unnoticed at first. A group of elegantly dressed Romans reclines on couches, their hair oiled, their fingers glittering with jewels. The mood here is softer, more intimate, but no less charged. On the table are cups of deep red wine, each steaming slightly as though warmed. Beside them, bowls of herbs, roots, and powders wait to be stirred in. The host, a woman with a knowing smile, picks up a vial and pours a few drops into her cup. The liquid hisses, releasing a sharp, resinous aroma. "For love," she murmurs, and the others laugh knowingly. She drinks, her cheeks flushing almost instantly, her laughter spilling louder and freer. Romans were fascinated by aphrodisiacs, strange concoctions meant to spark desire or heighten pleasure. Spiced wines were common, flavored with saffron, pepper, and even exotic ingredients from India. Some swore by oysters, claiming the sea itself carried an erotic spark. Others trusted stranger brews, crushed herbs, animal parts, or honey mixed with mandrake. One fact often mentioned in texts: Pliny the Elder listed dozens of such recipes, some absurd, some dangerously potent. You watch as another guest sprinkles powdered root into his drink. He downs it quickly, then leans back with a sigh that borders on theatrical. His partner beside him giggles, tracing a finger down his arm. Around the courtyard, couples pair off, the air thick with expectation. But aphrodisiacs weren't just about love. They were about control. A jealous spouse might slip a potion into a rival's drink. A hopeful lover might use herbs to ignite affection where none existed. Scholars still argue whether these substances truly worked, or if belief itself, the power of suggestion, did most of the magic. As you linger at the edge of the gathering, someone hands you a cup. The wine inside glows golden, flecked with tiny herbs. Its aroma is rich, sweet, and faintly bitter. You sip, and warmth spreads through you, deeper than wine, sharper than spice. Your skin tingles, your breath quickens, and the laughter around you suddenly feels brighter, closer, as though the whole courtyard leans toward you. A couple nearby kisses, their movements bold under the candlelight. Another pair disappears behind a curtain, giggling as they stumble. The air is heavy now, charged, thick with heat and perfume. And you, caught in the middle, feel the pull of it, the strange cocktail of desire, intoxication, and ritual. The host catches your gaze and raises her cup, as if toasting to the power of human hunger. Hunger for food, for wine, for love, for everything that blurs the edges of ordinary life. You raise yours back, the golden liquid glinting like fire. In Rome, intoxication wasn't only about losing yourself. Sometimes it was about finding the raw, untamed parts of yourself that society tried to cover. Tonight, in this candle-lit courtyard, you feel that truth as clearly as the warmth flooding your veins. When you finally step back into the cool night, the air feels sharp, almost cleansing. Behind you, the courtyard glows with laughter and whispers. But ahead, the streets stretch wide and waiting. You realize there's always another Roman doorway with another cup, another secret waiting to be tasted. The city grows quieter as you drift toward its edges, away from the villas and courtyards of pleasure. Out here, the buildings harden into barracks and training grounds. The laughter of lovers is replaced by the clang of metal, the bark of orders, the grunt of soldiers in practice even at night. Rome did not build its empire on wine alone. It marched on discipline, sweat, and, though few admit it, stimulants that kept its armies moving. You pause near a torchlit yard where a group of legionaries gathers, not in rigid formation, but in loose circles. Their armor lies stacked against the wall, their tunics dark with sweat. At the center sits a jar of something steaming. Each man dips a ladle, gulps and exhales as though fire itself slides down his throat. Roman soldiers were no strangers to strong drink. Wine was issued regularly, often mixed with water or vinegar, into posca, a sour brew that kept thirst at bay and spirits high. But sometimes soldiers needed more than wine. They needed courage, endurance, or the illusion of invincibility. Into their cups went herbs, fennel for strength, rue for focus, perhaps even extracts of opium when wounds demanded numbness. One mainstream fact: records show Roman commanders often distributed special rations before long marches or brutal battles, meant to sharpen or steady their men. A veteran notices you and waves you over. His eyes glint under the torchlight, his grin both tired and wild. He presses a cup into your hand. The liquid is darker than wine, with a bitter tang that stings your nose. You sip, and heat rushes through you, faster than any feast's drink, a sharp edge rather than a soft blur. And then laugh louder, slap each other's backs harder. They tell stories of Gaul, of Parthia, of deserts and forests where fear stalked every shadow. One man boasts that after 3 cups of this brew, he could march 100 miles without rest. Another insists he once fought 3 days straight, blade in hand, vision sharp, body untouchable. Scholars still argue whether these claims were exaggerations, or if some Roman concoctions really did push the body beyond its limits. But not all tales are triumphant. A younger soldier sits quietly at the edge, his face pale. His cup trembles in his hands. The others tease him, call him weak, but his eyes dart nervously, wide and restless. You realize the stimulant has tipped too far. It has given him no courage, only panic. He mutters under his breath, words tumbling too fast, until an older comrade steadies him with a hand and takes his cup away. The darker side of these battlefield highs becomes clear. What fueled courage could just as easily fuel madness. Roman commanders knew this, yet they kept the cups flowing. After all, an army of men too reckless was still better than an army of men too afraid. The soldiers around you begin to chant, banging their cups on the ground in rhythm. The sound rises like thunder, echoing against the stone walls, vibrating in your chest. Their faces gleam with sweat and fervor, eyes shining brighter than the torches. For a moment, you almost believe them. Believe that with this brew, no enemy could ever touch them, that Rome's power truly came from what filled its soldiers' veins as much as their swords. When the chanting fades and the jar runs empty, the men stagger back toward their bunks, laughing, boasting, some still jittering with too much energy. You slip away into the night, the bitter taste lingering on your tongue, your heart still racing, and you can't help but think, perhaps Rome conquered the world not only with discipline and steel, but with cups of courage brewed in the shadows, mixtures that made men believe they were gods, if only until dawn. The road back toward the city center feels strangely hushed after the soldiers' yard. The torches flicker less brightly here, and the air carries the faint scent of incense drifting from distant temples. You follow it, drawn toward the great marble steps of a sanctuary where shadows stretch long and solemn. Inside, the space feels immense, echoing with whispers you can't quite place. Candles glow against the columns, their flames bending as if in a draught that doesn't exist. At the altar, priests pour wine into bronze bowls, mixing it with herbs and resins until the smoke curls upward in thick ribbons. The congregation breathes it in deeply, their eyes half closed, swaying gently as hymns echo across the chamber. Here, intoxication isn't indulgence, it's devotion. To the Romans, wine wasn't just a drink, it was a god. Bacchus embodied ecstasy, frenzy, and the tearing down of boundaries. Apollo, linked with medicine, stood beside visions and prophecy, where substances blurred into divine tools. One historical fact: the Oracle of Delphi in Greece, adopted in Rome's spiritual imagination, was believed to speak in trance after inhaling vapors. Romans knew these stories and saw no contradiction between drugged ecstasy and sacred truth. You sit quietly at the edge, watching a priest sprinkle crushed laurel leaves into the fire. The smoke rises bitter and sharp, filling your nostrils, making your head feel oddly light. Around you, worshippers begin to murmur in unison, a low hum that vibrates like bees inside a hive. Some clasp their hands, others throw their heads back, eyes rolled upward, as though seeing something beyond the ceiling. One man suddenly shouts, his voice breaking the chant. He claims Bacchus himself stands before him, crowned with ivy, urging everyone to drink, to dance, to cast off chains. The crowd erupts, some nodding, others gasping. Scholars still argue whether such visions were genuine, induced by substances, or staged by priests who knew exactly how to control a smoky room. The priest approaches you, his robes heavy with the scent of incense. He hands you a cup, its surface glistening with spiced wine. The first sip is warm, sweet, but the aftertaste burns with something herbal. As you swallow, the chanting grows louder, the smoke thicker, and suddenly the columns seem to ripple like water. The god isn't here, but for a moment, you understand why people believed he was. The ritual builds to a crescendo, voices rising, drums pounding, feet stamping on marble, until the temple itself trembles. The worshippers sway and shout, their bodies caught between prayer and frenzy. And you, swept into their rhythm, feel your pulse matching theirs. For a fleeting heartbeat, you wonder if divinity truly is just a different angle of intoxication. Then, as quickly as it began, it ends. The fire dwindles, the chant fades, the worshippers slump in silence. Some weep softly, others smile with serene joy. The priest gathers the last of the smoke into his robes as though it belongs to him alone. You leave the temple slowly, your head still buzzing, your lungs filled with incense. Outside, the night air is sharp and cool, grounding you again. But deep inside, you carry the impression that gods were never separate from the substances Romans brewed, burned, and swallowed. Myth and medicine, faith and intoxication, they were threads of the same tapestry, woven tight. And you can't help but think, in Rome, to touch the divine often meant breathing smoke, sipping herbs, and letting yourself slip into the haze between this world and the next. The streets are calm again, but the city's heartbeat still thrums beneath the stone. You wander past statues of stern men in togas, their marble eyes fixed forward, as though they're silently watching every indulgence you've witnessed tonight. Beyond the temples and taverns, another Rome stirs, a Rome of debate, of polished words carved sharper than swords. You find yourself in a portico lit by oil lamps, where a small group of men reclines on couches, scrolls scattered at their feet. They are philosophers, senators, moralists, those who claim to shape Rome's soul. Their voices rise and fall in argument, as animated as the crowds in Saturnalia, but far more pointed. One man, lean and sharp-eyed, insists that indulgence destroys virtue. He quotes Stoic ideals, declaring that true strength lies in mastering the self, not surrendering it to wine or herbs. He jabs a finger at the air, his voice taut with conviction. Another laughs, raising his cup, arguing that pleasure is a gift from the gods. Why refuse what Bacchus offers so freely, he says, his words spilling like the drink he clutches. The debate circles endlessly. One fact you recall: philosophers like Seneca often warned against excess, while poets like Horace cheekily encouraged moderation, but never abstinence. Wine, Horace once suggested, unties the tongue, sharpens wit, and warms friendship. Scholars still argue whether Rome leaned more towards Stoic restraint or Epicurean embrace. The truth, of course, was muddled in the middle, as truths often are. The conversation shifts toward politics. A senator with a heavy brow claims that drunkenness weakens Rome, that soldiers lose their edge and citizens forget duty. Another counters that festivals and indulgence keep the people loyal, giving them release before they return to work. You watch the clash not just of ideas, but of worldviews, discipline versus delight, duty versus desire. A servant pours fresh wine, and even the sternest critic takes a sip. The irony is clear. Even those railing against intoxication cannot resist its pull. Their arguments sharpen, voices growing louder, gestures broader. At one point, a senator thunders that Bacchanalia nearly tore Rome apart, while a philosopher snickers that banning joy only feeds rebellion. You sit quietly, listening, your eyes tracing the lamplight as it flickers across their faces. And you realize this: Rome was never of one mind. It was both the feast and the fast, the temple smoke and the senate's marble. It was discipline carved into legions and indulgence poured into cups. Eventually, the debate softens, as wine tends to do. Laughter bubbles between arguments, and tired voices settle into murmurs. The scrolls lie forgotten, replaced by cups refilled again and again. When you leave the portico, the night feels balanced, caught between the extremes of ecstasy and restraint. The voices of philosophers linger in your ears, but so do the chants of worshippers and the laughter of revelers. Rome contains them all, holding contradiction as naturally as it holds stone. And you wonder, was Rome's greatness found in its self-control, or in its refusal to ever fully let go of indulgence? Perhaps both. Perhaps the empire marched forward precisely because it never chose just one path. You drift farther from the voices of senators and philosophers, slipping into the quieter veins of Rome. The city sleeps fitfully, never entirely still, like a giant exhaling in slow, uneven breaths. You trace your steps through narrow alleys where lamps flicker, casting shadows that dance like restless spirits. Ahead, a heavy door creaks open, and warm light spills into the dark. You pause, curious, and step closer. Inside, you find another gathering, smaller, quieter, but no less intoxicating. This is not a feast for the masses, nor a philosopher's argument. This is something more intimate, more secret. A handful of figures recline on couches draped in silk. Their robes are looser, their laughter lower, their eyes glazed but bright. On a table rests a collection of curious powders and herbs imported from places most Romans will never see. A merchant boasts that the blue-green dust comes from far-off Persia, while another swears the twisted root in the corner arrived by caravan from India. You watch as a host prepares a concoction, mixing herbs into a heated wine, stirring with deliberate slowness. The steam rises, carrying a sweet, cloying scent that clings to your nostrils. When the cup is passed, the drinker's face slackens. His voice turns velvety, his words wandering like dream fragments. The fact slips into your mind. Roman elites had access to foreign imports that blurred the line between medicine and indulgence. Opium from the East, hashish from Egypt, exotic resins and spices, all carried into Rome on the back of its empire. Scholars still argue whether these substances were used sparingly for pain relief or indulged recklessly in search of altered states. The truth, like everything in Rome, likely depended on who you asked and how wealthy they were. As the night deepens, the air in the chamber grows thick. Conversation slows, replaced by soft hums, absent-minded laughter, and the gentle strumming of a lyre in a corner. The sound blends with the sweet haze, creating a cocoon of half-dream. One guest sways as though caught in invisible waves, whispering about visions of gods descending in radiant light. Another reclines with a blissful sigh, insisting that he has unlocked wisdom beyond the reach of sober men. You notice the host watching you, his eyes narrowed in amusement. The empire's strength, he says softly, is not only in its legions or laws. It is here, in its appetite for knowledge, for pleasure, for the unknown. He lifts his cup, toasting to Rome's hunger. The room tilts slightly in your perception, though you haven't sipped a drop. The power of suggestion, the dense air, the flicker of firelight, it all conspires to pull you inward, like drifting into a dream. You blink, steady yourself, and step back toward the doorway. Outside, the cool night air cuts through the haze. You breathe deeply, letting the stars overhead reorient you. Rome, in this moment, feels like a patchwork quilt, each piece stitched from different lands, cultures, substances, and stories. Some squares dazzle with color, others darken with shadow, but all are bound together in a restless, living whole. And as you wander on, you realize you've only scratched the surface. Rome's indulgences are as endless as its streets, as sprawling as its empire. Every door hides another secret, every alley another ritual, every shadow another story waiting to be uncovered. The city's edges fade into quiet neighborhoods where the hum of revelry is replaced by soft whispers of night. You walk past closed doors, their interiors hidden, but you can still sense the pulse of Rome in every flickering candle, in every faint scent of spiced wine and burning herbs. It's as if the city itself exhales slowly, leaving behind a residue of dreams, indulgence, and longing. You pause near a fountain, its water glimmering silver in the moonlight. The sound is soothing, a contrast to the chaos you've wandered through. You think back to the banquets, the Bacchic rituals, the temples, the aphrodisiac-laden courtyards, the soldiers' potent cups, and the philosophers' debates. All of it, the excess, the ritual, the indulgence, flows together like the fountain's gentle current. Rome, in its entirety, seems designed to be experienced in layers, some visible, some hidden, some only sensed in the quiet after the party ends. The mainstream historical fact returns to your mind, now woven into everything you've seen. Romans used intoxicants in many forms, from wine and herbs to exotic imports, and these substances were part of the fabric of daily life, culture, and ceremony. And yet, the quirks, the whispered debates over potency, the secretive circles of elites experimenting with distant plants, the fringe rituals, remind you that indulgence and discovery were inseparable. Scholars still argue about which practices were symbolic and which were functional, but the mixture of both created a city alive with experience. You lean against the fountain, letting the water's gentle gurgle lull your senses. The sky above is clear, stars mirrored faintly in the rippling surface below. You recall the countless small moments, the laugh of a drunk soldier, the sway of a temple devotee, the quiet pride of a host mixing a secret potion, and you realize that Rome's party culture was never just about pleasure. It was about humanity, seeking the edges of reality, chasing altered states, testing limits, and savoring life's intensity, however fleeting. The night air carries a faint scent of incense and herbs from a nearby villa, a reminder that these experiences ripple outward, touching corners of the city that seem otherwise ordinary. You inhale deeply, feeling a gentle warmth spread through your chest. Your body is heavy with the echo of the night's indulgences, but your mind drifts, calm and reflective. Now, dim the lights if you haven't already. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Imagine the city winding down after centuries of revelry, and picture yourself walking the streets of Rome one final time, savoring the quiet after the storm. Every cup, every chant, every laugh you witnessed exists as a whisper in the memory of the empire. Let it settle in you, slow and soft, like the gentle pull of water over stone. Breathe deeply. Your eyes feel heavier now. Let your thoughts drift as the city exhales, leaving behind the scent of wine, herbs, and firelight. The streets empty, the fountains sing softly, and you feel the weight of centuries settle gently on your shoulders. Let Rome's pulse slow in your chest, a heartbeat that matches your own.